Welcome to Big Daddy's Story Time. We're reading The Magic School Bus in a Pickle. It's not hard to find a mystery when you have Miss Frizzle for a teacher. Take what happened when we returned to school after a vacation. The first thing Keisha did was run to the class garden to check on her cucumber. But Keisha was in for a terrible surprise. Her cucumber was gone. Someone had replaced it with a pickle in a jar. But who? Keisha has a big dilemma. Carlos. Keisha loved her cucumber. She had grown it from a seed. It was huge, a champion, and now it was gone. At least whoever took it left you with a tasty looking pickle, Wanda told Keisha. Wanda picked a rotten carrot. Look at my carrot! Not even a starving rabbit would eat it now. Arnold stared at a moldy tomato rotting on the vine. My tomato doesn't even look like a tomato anymore, he moaned. It would have been better off stolen. How could things that were so good turn so bad over one little vacation? Just then, Miss Frizzle walked into the classroom. She was munching on a crunchy, delicious pickle. Good morning, class, she greeted us between crunches. Keisha interrupted Miss Frizzle's snack. Miss Frizzle, my cucumber was stolen while we were on vacation. We must have had a thief in here, she said. Miss Frizzle lifted up the pickle jar that stood where Keisha's cucumber once grew. Is this what you're looking for, Keisha? She asked innocently. Keisha was conf- Keisha was confessed that was my cucumber, she told our teacher. It's a pickle. You caught me, Ralphie. I have a powerful passion for pickles. What? There's a ton of pickles in here. Something smells funny in here. Keisha looked Miss Frizzle straight in the eye. All I know is that the door to this classroom was locked during vacation, and you had the key. Keisha, Phoebe exclaimed, are you suggesting that Miss Frizzle, our beloved teacher, well, she could have done something with my cucumber, Keisha interrupted. You're right, Keisha, I admit it. Miss Frizzle? I admit that, thanks to me, your cucumber is gone, Miss Frizzle told Keisha. But it isn't missing, she added mysteriously. Keisha was confused. How can something be gone but not missing, she asked. Miss Frizzle held up the pickle jar. You see, Keisha, this pickle used to be your cucumber. Isn't that amazing? Keisha shook her head angrily. Not amazing and not possible, she declared. That that does not look or smell like my cucumber, and I am sure it does not taste like my cucumber. Don't bite that pickle. You're destroying the evidence. What evidence? This isn't a trial, is it? Before long, our classroom looked like a courtroom. Keisha was the prosecutor. Arnold was defending Miss Frizzle. The Honorable Liz Ard, better known as Liz, was the judge. Keisha stood to make her opening statement. I intend to prove that Miss Frizzle not only took my prize-winning cucumber, but also that she did not turn it into a pickle. Much to our surprise, Miss Frizzle applauded Keisha's statement. Oh, bravo, Keisha, she cheered. I intend to prove the same thing. It's so nice when everyone is on the same side. But Keisha did not feel they were on the same side. She held up a pickle and a small cucumber. Kids of the jury, this is a pickle. And this is a cucumber. Not as big as my cucumber, but still a cucumber. Miss Frizzle is asking us to believe that these two are the same thing. But I ask you, do these look like the same thing to you? I don't think so. Miss Frizzle doesn't seem nervous. Nope, she's cool as a cucumber. Then it was Arnold's turn to speak. "We will prove that no crime was committed, and Miss Frizzle is innocent of all charges," Arnold said. Then he turned nervously to Miss Frizzle. "Right?" he whispered. Much to Arnold's surprise, Miss Frizzle shook her head. "As I have already said, I did take Keisha's cucumber. However, I did not turn it into a pickle." Miss Frizzle paused and looked at the jury. "But I know who did!" she exclaimed. Miss Frizzle leaned forward and spoke softly. They were members of a gang, a small-time gang with big ideas, a tiny troublesome crowd of two-bit thieves known as the Microbe Gang. And even though they hang around a lot of different places, they're extremely hard to find because they are invisible. An invisible gang? Oh no! This was more dangerous than we thought. Invisible? I think Miss Frizzle is losing it. Arnold was getting nervous. His client did sound as though she were losing it. "Tell him, Miss Frizzle," Arnold pled. "Tell them the gang is invisible because they wear disguises, right?" Miss Frizzle shook her head. "Oh no," she said. "They're invisible because they are too small to be seen." Keisha leaped to her feet. "How can Miss Frizzle expect us to believe that my cucumber was turned into a pickle by a gang of thieves we cannot even see?" she demanded. "Keisha has a point," Dorothy Ann agreed. "How can you prove that?" Arnold was stumped. He wasn't that good a lawyer. Luckily, Miss Frizzle had an idea. She whispered something in Arnold's ear. Before Arnold could stop himself, the words had left his mouth. "We're taking the court on a field trip." Gulp. Did I say that? Did Arnold say that? "Our school bus never flew at my old school." Sigh. "I wish I went to your old school." We all went outside, piled into the bus, and buckled our seatbelts. Liz stayed behind in the courtroom, or the court classroom. "Bus, do your stuff," Miss Frizzle commanded. Suddenly the bus turned into a flying blimp and began to shrink. We began to shrink, too. None of us were really surprised. Things like that tend to happen when Miss Frizzle is at the wheel. We flew right back into the classroom. The bus landed near a flower pot. There Arnold spotted the perfect piece of evidence to prove his case, a white ball growing on one of the petals. "I'll bet Keisha's never seen one of these before," he said to Miss Frizzle. "Not likely, Arnold. It's much too tiny. It's a kind of yeast called an ascomycete," Miss Frizzle explained. "It grows just about everywhere." Arnold turned to address the jury. "If it's so tiny, you can only see it when you're tiny. That makes it an invisible member of the Microbe Gang. Just like Miss Frizzle said, I rest my case." We were all pretty impressed, all except Keisha, that is. "Not so fast, Arnold. Just because there are tiny little creatures here doesn't mean that they are everywhere," Keisha argued. "And it doesn't mean they turned my cucumber into a pickle." Just to prove her point, Keisha asked Miss Frizzle to land the bus on Liz to see if any of the Microbe Gang were hanging out on her scales. The bus took off and landed on Liz's nose. The Microbe Gang was there in full force. We could see tiny spiral-shaped creatures crawling all along Liz's scaly skin. Suddenly, Liz swatted at her nose and sent the bus sailing through the air. We landed with a splash. Where are we now? I hope we're not back in the water cycle. We're in the hamster's water bowl. All around us were fat, blob-like creatures swallowing creatures that looked like hairy hot dogs. The fat, juicy ones are amoebas. Miss Frizzle told us. The ones that look like hairy hot dogs are paramecia, and they are all members of the Microbe Gang. Gosh, I never knew things like these existed, Keisha admitted. But now you do, Arnold announced. And not only that, they're everywhere. Case closed. Hey, amoeba, try a little mustard with that paramecium. Objection, Keisha shouted. These gang members may be swimming in the water, but I don't see them changing the water into anything. Arnold's face turned red. Keisha had him there. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Arnold spotted his rotten tomato. Something was definitely changing there. You want change? I'll show you change, he promised. To my tomato, Miss Frizzle, and hurry. With the flick of a switch, the bus flew off. We escaped just before the hamster took a sip of us. I sensed changes in the air. We landed right on Arnold's gushy tomato. Red juice splashed all over the bus. The smell was horrible. I told you something was going on, Arnold told Keisha proudly. But Keisha was not convinced. Smelly and gushy are not enough. I don't see anything here to change my mind but a rotten tomato. Maybe we need to shrink some more, Arnold sputtered nervously. So Miss Frizzle pushed a button and we shrunk until we were very, very small. We all sank further down into the rotten tomato. What's your objection now, Arnold? I object to being the world's smallest defense attorney. The puppy the pulpy center of the tomato was even squashier and smaller than the surface. Something with tall, thin stalks and round tops grew all around us. Every few seconds, the tops of the stalks would erupt, shooting bean-shaped creatures out into the tomato. The bean-shaped creatures all had a long, thin arm, or had long, thin arms. Miss Frizzle said all these creatures were called funguses, and they were members of the Microbe Gang. Miss Frizzle thought it was time for us to come face to face with fungus. Okay, class, Miss Frizzle cheered. It's time to get messy. Into your anti-fungus suits, everyone. Then she opened the door of the bus. I knew I should have stayed home today. The funguses were tough gang members. We watched nervously as they attacked Arnold's tomato. They're just doing what funguses do, Miss Frizzle assured us. Keisha was amazed. You mean they're supposed to destroy the tomato? She exclaimed. Carlos laughed. Hey, even a fungus needs to eat, he joked. What if they eat us next? Then Miss Frizzle will need a new defense attorney. So now we knew that Microbe Gang members really were everywhere and they could make things change. We also found out you couldn't really see them unless you used a really powerful microscope or you had a teacher who could shrink you until you were very incredibly small. But believe it or not, it was not enough proof for Keisha. You still haven't proven that they turned my cucumber into a pickle, she said. Before Miss Frizzle could reply, the tomato started to bubble, ooze, and shake. We were caught right in the middle of a tomato quake. Help! 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 The tomato exploded. We were being washed away in a sea of smelly, fungus-filled tomato juice. The tomato river flowed through the class garden and carried us over the edge of the bookshelf. We landed inside a glass jar. We were trapped there, forced to swim in the yellow-green liquid. We were swimming in pickle brine. This is it, Keisha. This is where it all happened. We're in Miss Frizzle's pickle jar. We weren't the only newcomers to the pickle jar. Some of the tomato funguses had washed in also. So the fungus was still among us, and boy, were these funguses hungry. They headed right over toward the pickle. It was dinner time. First the funguses ate the tomato. Now they're trying to eat the pickle, Keisha exclaimed. We were amazed. Those Microbe Gang members were really tough. You mean we're actually at the scene of the crime? But the tomato funguses never reached the pickle. They were stopped by some sausage-shaped creature that were already sucking at the pickle. The sausage-shaped creatures squirted out pickle juice as they ate the pickle. The pickle juice killed the funguses. Whenever a fungus was hit by pickle juice, it shriveled up and floated away. These sausage-shaped things are a kind of bacteria, Miss Frizzle told us. They're also members of the Microbe Gang. Wipe out the funguses are history. Look at those pickle protectors work. Cucumber alert! The pickle bacteria were good shots. Before long, there weren't many tomato funguses left alive. Hooray! But our joy was short-lived. Suddenly, we were rocketed by a large splash. Liz had accidentally knocked a cucumber into the jar. The cucumber slid past us and landed at the bottom of the jar. The pickle bacteria immediately latched on to the cucumber and began sucking at its skin. What's happening? Keisha asked with alarm. I thought the pickle bacteria were the good guys. The bacteria are the good guys, Phoebe told her. If it weren't for the pickle bacteria destroying the funguses, the same rotten thing that happened to tomato would happen to this cucumber. They're not destroying the cucumber, they're saving it. Without bacteria, this cucumber would be in a real pickle. Instead, it's becoming a real pickle. The funguses rot things by eating them, Wanda added, and the pickle bacteria stop things from rotting by getting rid of the funguses. There's only one problem, Ralphie interrupted. The bacteria are turning the cucumber into a pickle. Miss Frizzle smiled. Not a problem, Ralphie, she insisted. That's preservation. A pickle lasts a lot longer than a cucumber. These tiny things we've seen may be small, but they make big changes, and they are all called microbes. Did you say microbes? Arnold now had all the evidence he needed. Kids of the jury, we've seen all around us is an invisible world filled with creatures like amoebas, paramecia, funguses, and bacteria, he began, and they are all called microbes. Obviously, the gang is really called the Microbe Gang, not the Microbe Gang, but whatever you call them, microbes make big changes, like turning a cucumber into a pickle. Now, even Keisha had to admit that the pickle really was her cucumber. Miss Frizzle was found innocent of all charges. She hadn't stolen Keisha's cucumber. She'd saved it by putting it in the pickle brine. Miss Frizzle was a true heroine. We piled back on the bus. With the flick of a switch, we grew back to our regular sizes and prepared to spend another typical day in Miss Frizzle's class, although a day in Miss Frizzle's class is never typical. Case closed. Letters to the editor. Dear editor, I have a little question for you. Since people can't really shrink, how can anyone get close enough to a microbe to see what it really looks like? Dear I am, the only way you see microbes is through a microscope, which makes things appear hundreds or even thousands of times bigger than they really are. Dear editor, are the members of the Microbe Gang good guys or bad guys? Can't some of them make you sick? Dear Bea, what is true that germs? While it is true that germs, including those that get you sick, are microbes, most microbes are really harmless. Some even help us out. For instance, yeast are the microbes that make pizza dough rise. Pizza. I'm getting hungry. Gotta go. From the desk of Miss Frizzle, a note to parents, teachers, and kids. Just because you're small doesn't mean you can't change things. Microbes are too small to be seen without the use of a microscope, but they have some big effects on our world. We've already talked about how microbes change cucumbers into pickles. How Now, here's another big change made by microbes. If you leave skim milk on your counter, it may spoil, but sometimes it can become cottage cheese. That's because the microbes eat the natural sugar that makes the milk sweet and then gets rid of the waste products in the form of an acid that curdles milk. If the right microbes are in that jug of milk, the milk will become cottage cheese. Cottage cheese and pickles. How's that for a bad combination? Aren't aren't the only things that might that are aren't the only things made by microbes. Microbes are also responsible for lots of other food changes, like turning grape juice into wine and cream to sugar cream, or cream to sour cream or cheese. Yeast microbes cause dough to rise and become bread. But microbes don't affect only food, they can turn fallen leaves into plant fertilizer or make polluted lakes and ponds green with scum. They can even come into your body through your mouth, nose, or cuts in your skin and make you sick. Microbes can help keep you well too by just being there and preventing other harmful microbes from living there instead. These are some big jobs for such small folks. Signed, Miss Frizzle. What have we learned today, my friends? We have learned from Miss Frizzle that little things can make big changes. Also, we learned about the fun science about microbes. Be sure to like, favorite, and subscribe. Stay tuned for more Big Daddy Story Time. God bless.